We are holding court this morning with the CEO of the Nairobi Securities Exchange. This is Geoffrey Odundo. Also, we have Dr. Habil Olaka, who is the CEO of Kenya Bankers Association. We do have with us as well Stanley Munduku, who is an advocate of the High Court, also an expert on oil and gas. And we continue the conversation at pace. We were eagerly waiting for also Gabriel Negatu, who is the Regional Director of African Development Bank, to join us, but it seems he has slept through his alarm, trying to call him. He's not picking up his phone. But we continue with the show. Nonetheless, you can also get to drive the show with me. Hit us on Twitter. AM Live NTV is our Twitter handle, AM Live NTV, our profile name on Facebook, and 20686 our SMS portal. Right, so before we took a short break, we were still on it. We want to wrap up on the interest cap moving forward. We're eagerly waiting to see all this, where it is headed. Are we going to also take this debate next year, or what will be the happy medium? And I think that is a question that we're asking you finally. What is a happy medium, and what will you desire to see as bankers, especially on the interest rate? Then we gravitate the discussion to digital lending, where also the issue of interest rate is coming. So at what rate are they pegging also their lending?
I think that's a valid question, and I think we need to look at where we started from in 2016. You remember the law had two aspects. There was the aspect of the capping, which is the one that is really live, but there was also the aspect of putting a minimum rate that banks were to pay on the deposits that are interest paying. And through the debate last year, the same parliament did actually remove that provision and retained the cap. So I think the next step would be to now move on to relooking at the cap and seeing what can be done about it. And that's why we think, in the ultimate end, the ultimate objective at the end of the day would be to remove the cap. The question is how long it will take to remove that cap. And it requires us, as players, convincing one another that it's in the best interest of the economy to have the caps removed. I think you saw Governor Njoroge, hitting at the same point of the fact that when the law was passed, the intention was to have a free market, but in view of the circumstances, this was thought to be necessary. I think what we need to do is to ensure that we establish an environment where we are convincing all the stakeholders that we now have an environment where the caps are no longer necessary. And I think that's what you're working towards. So the point that we had discussed a little bit earlier, where in the event that, for example, there is still concerns about the fact that when the caps are removed, there would be still lingering concerns, we can actually move in steps as well. So we can put the corridor we mentioned, where we create a 6% margin within which the SMEs can come in and negotiate. And seeing how that works, then the next step would be to remove the caps altogether. I think that would be a well spaced out progress towards the eventual idea of having the caps removed.
All right. Sandy, can see you string at the other list to say something.
I think that there are two things I have to say is that the experience we had, like I've had acting for various banks and even for various consumers of the financial services. There's something that my fellow panelist here stated, that the current loans will not be affected by the interest.
Yes.
You realize that how the interest clause is always crafted in mortgage instruments and in loan agreements, you realize that they normally leave room for variation. You will say that the current interest is maybe like 13.5%, yeah? And then there's a bracket saying, we'll say that it may be increased or it may be adjusted from time to time, depending either with the economic dictates or whatever it is that they say, or the cost of money in the business. So really, we are not very sure that even the person who is currently enjoying an interest rate of 13%, the moment the cap is done away with, that interest will not go up, because the agreement allows, the loan agreement, the mortgage instrument allows that particular variation. The other issue that you also have to look at, why access to the SME is restricted. You realize, you look at it from an access to credit point of view, and you realize that for somebody to go and borrow or qualify for that particular borrowing is not really a factor of interest alone. And that is why you realize that the digital lenders they're still in business. The Shylocks, they're still in business. Why? You realize there's a whole host of bureaucratic requirements for you to access a bank loan. If you're an SME, maybe like a startup, for sure you might never get access to credit. there are very limited products that allow startups to commence. For instance, you'll be asked for 3 years bank statements, 3 years audited accounts. You'll be asked yet for security and all that. But you realize when you come to the digital lenders, yeah, all that is not done. All that is done away with. So you realize that most Kenyans do not mind paying a premium, yeah, and obtaining the loan now when they need it, as opposed to getting the loan at a lower interest rate,
yes,
yeah, but never get it at the end of the day. Yeah, so those are some of the dynamics that we have to look at.
Right.
I think just my
Yes.
point, and I hear the argument here. What is in event of a crisis, assuming that a lender has gone to a mobile lender who is not regulated, etc., every borrower seeks protection from the central bank. If something happens in that sector, for instance, if there's a recoveries or some form of crisis happening, there'll always be a remediation expectation from central bank. So there is an argument that it's important to really borrow from regulated markets.
Yes.
Because it's not just the access to the credit, but really what other protections do you have? So I think there's a case for, even if mobile lenders are to exist, there has to be some form of a regulatory framework for them so that the consumer is protected. And that's a very important point. I think the other issue is the issue around access to credit has also been based on what you call the crowding out, where, of course, as you said, government is accessing money from the banks. Consumers are also accessing, SMEs accessing money from the banks. But there's an alternative for them to access money from the stock market and the capital markets. So we have created platforms for incubation of companies that would one day want to list,
yes,
and be able to access equity capital from the market and maybe have a mix of two and reduce pressures on themselves. So there's also the window that lenders, that SMEs can access alternative platforms, but within a regulated environment. So I think there's need for that to be considered.